Welcome, everybody. I am Jane Searing with Deloitte's Global Philanthropy Group, and I want to thank you all for being here today. I also want to thank all of our SPAN, Seattle Philanthropic Advisors members for being here. Without membership, it would be very difficult to keep doing this, and also to thank our sponsors. So our sponsors are Clark Nuber, Fulcrum Capital, the Glazer Foundation, Hessel Fennerman, the Swedish Foundation, and U.S. Bank Private Wealth Management. So big thank you to all of our sponsors. Appreciate that. We're also looking for new sponsors, or additional sponsors. So if you are interested in sponsoring SPAN, please let us know. It's a small number, but it's also has a big impact because we're a small organization, which we'll be talking about with George and Kathy about how smaller numbers can have a big impact depending on how you deploy them. And also I want to thank my fellow board members for all of their work. They all volunteer, and we really appreciate them. Regina, where are you? Regina Bully, over there. Laura Huxler here. Thank you. Sarah Sabo. Where's Sarah? Over there. We put her in the corner today. Sorry, Sarah. And then Sarah Hanley, who's checking everybody in. Thank you, Sarah, for all of your work. So why are we here today? We're here to have another conversation with two more very impactful philanthropists from the Seattle area, George and Kathy Edwards. I don't know how many of you know them. It seems like a lot of people in the room know them, but I am going to read their bios while they're still sitting at the table and they can blush away. George and Kathy are actually married to each other, which is great. Same last name. It's not a coincidence. George is a native Texan. We will not hold this against you, George. I love Texas. It's fine. Who, after graduating from college at the stint of duty with the United States Air Force, fell into teaching, coaching, and being an administrator in independent college prep schools. George served as the headmaster or head school for 5 independent schools in Texas, Alabama, and Washington. I think Epiphany was your last one. Is that right? There we go. George has served in a variety of nonprofit boards and as an advisor and counselor to a variety of executives in the nonprofit area. I know when he retired, he served as an advisor to other head of schools with that many years of experience. Like, these are the things you're going to encounter that you need help with. So thank you, George. Kathy and I actually are friends going back to board service, and she roped me into another board. But so be careful when you go around Kathy, because you may find yourself serving on a board of directors before you know it. But Kathy has attained a PhD in human and organizational systems, and she spent 30 years doing organizational development work with nonprofit organizations throughout the U.S. and internationally. She has numerous articles and nonprofit governance and leadership published in regional and national publications. Kathy has also served on numerous nonprofit boards, which is how I met her, including the Washington Women's Foundation, Planned Parenthood of the Greater Northwest, World Neighbors in Oklahoma City, which is an international development organization, and also St. George's School in Spokane, Washington. After retiring in 2005, Kathy and George founded the Cedarmere Foundation, which is going to be a big part of our conversation today. For the past 18 years, Kathy has served as the foundation's president and led its efforts to strengthen leadership and infrastructure of nonprofit organizations in the Puget Sound region through capacity building grants. In recent years, Kathy's leadership, the foundation has narrowed its focus by being intentional about building the capacity of BIPOC-led and BIPOC-serving nonprofits in order to better meet the needs of the under-resourced communities and give their members a voice. Kathy served 2 years as the co-chair of the Washington State Capacity Collaborative in 2001 and 2002, and she and her board have recently completed the process of distributing the foundation's entire endowment through grants to capacity building organizations and setting the Cedarmere Foundation. I know that's a lot, but really I wanted to give you all the background on George and Kathy, because they're an amazing couple and they've had a huge impact. Before I invite them up, where are our table sponsors, our table captains? You should have a piece of paper that looks like this. Thank you for voluntolding. Appreciate that. You do not need to use the conversation starter questions, but last time people said, oh, we needed a little boost. So if you are one of those people that does not need a boost, you can just put this piece of paper away. If you do want a little boost, it's there for your help. And the last item is there is one copy at each table. It does not have to turn into a death match. You don't have to, and you don't have to rip it apart and each take your favorite pages. On the last page, there is right inside the back cover, I will point to it right here. There is a website right here where you can go and download a copy for yourself. And there are a few more copies at the table with Sarah. So if you really want, there were two of you that were battling it out. One of you can go get one at the table. With that, I'm going to invite Kathy and George up and we will have a conversation. Don't worry, you're going to get a chance to ask your questions. I won't completely hog them to myself. But enjoy your lunches while we have a conversation. And at the end, we will let you ask questions. So thank you for being here. So the extra copies actually are in my chair. I'll put them up at the table at the end. Thank you, Kathy. And I'm going to move forward just a little bit. Maybe not. There. Hi. I know the people at table 29, it's hard. I'm sorry. But you can see George and Kathy, right? It's not table 29. That was a movie. Sorry. A movie reference. So you can see George and Kathy, right? Okay. There we go. Table 29 is that awkward wedding table where you put all the guests that your parents wanted to invite? Okay. Yeah. Sorry. It's on Netflix, I believe. You can go ahead and and Google that later. Okay. For those of you who do not know, you have to provide, I read you the bio, but for those that don't know you, George and Kathy, what in your bio that I did read led you to have, what's your background for philanthropic lives and how have they affected or influenced your activities and the decision to form the Cedarmere Foundation?
Well, as a native Texan, philanthropy was not a major concern in my family. We grew up in a very kind of lower middle class family. So most of my experience with philanthropy and nonprofit organizations came from my professional life as a head of a series of schools, because I worked for a variety of boards and kind of throughout the United States, and noticed pretty quickly that if you met one board, you've met one board, and they were all different in the way they approached basically the same issues kind of in schools throughout the country. And what I came to understand is how important the governance of nonprofit organizations are. And I think that translated into my interest in forming the Cedarmere Foundation with my lovely bride.
How about you, Kathy?
Well, I have to say, being a member of the Washington Women's Foundation had a huge influence on me, and there might not have been a Cedarmere Foundation had it not been for what I learned through that experience and seeing the impact of the grant making that the Washington Women's Foundation has been doing for 30 years now. In terms of how my background influenced what Cedarmere ended up funding, for those 25 years that I served as an organization development consultant with nonprofit organizations, the organizations I worked with were having to find the funds to pay me, whether it was to facilitate a strategic planning process or provide governance training for boards or whatever. And I knew how hard it was to come by those funds and how vitally important that kind of capacity building work was to these nonprofit organizations. So when we sat down to decide what the Cedarmere Foundation was going to do and what we were going to fund, given George's background as well as mine, and the fact that we were a very small foundation, we had limited funds to give, and we wanted to have as big an impact as we possibly could, through our grants. We knew that funding capacity building, which is not often funded certainly by foundations and probably not by individuals either, was a way we could maximize our impact for the small dollars we had to grant.
So in keeping with that, maybe you could talk a little bit about, what did you look for when you're deciding to fund a nonprofit organization for their capacity building, and distinguish how the difference for making a grant for capacity building is different than just giving a general operating grant that's unrestricted?
I think that's an incredibly important distinction because although I think philanthropy in general has moved away from restricted grants, often they used to make only restricted program grants, not even allowing much for overhead. And I think many more foundations now make general operating support grants. But I think they often assume that if the grant is unrestricted, that the organizations will use some of it for capacity building. Unfortunately, the reality is, particularly for small nonprofits, once the rent is paid and salaries are paid and program is supported, there's nothing left over ever because demand always exceeds the capacity to meet it. And so capacity building seldom happens in small nonprofits unless they receive funds that are designated for that specific purpose. And I could give you a limitless number of examples of how having access to those funds allowed nonprofits to strengthen their staff, build their infrastructure in ways that never would have happened without it. But we don't have time for that today, for all those examples. When we first started out, we hired a foundation consultant, a friend of mine from the World Neighbors Board in Oklahoma City, Frank Merrick, who had a foundation management organization. And Frank had probably a bigger influence on who we were, what we did, and how we did it than anybody else. We had a weekend-long retreat with all of the family members there. We developed a mission and vision statement. We developed our policies and procedures and decided that our grant making would focus exclusively on capacity building.
And when we say we started small, we started small. We had a very small endowment that was we decided to employ with small organizations. So we started out looking at the Puget Sound area and small organizations. For us, we said we're $3 million in budget, and we quickly understood that what we were really looking at were smaller not-for-profit organizations. So in our first cycle of grant making, many of these organizations had budgets of less than $500,000. So they were constrained in their capacity building. We also looked at organizations. We learned pretty quickly how important effective leadership was in nonprofit organizations. And part of our story is how we evolved that thinking over the next 18 years to look at how our small dollars could be impactful. And I think that first year, our typical grant was like $2,500. So when I say small, they were small.
I want to jump back in and just read you the definition of capacity building that the Statewide Capacity Collaborative developed after a lot of work, I might add, because many people don't really know what we're talking about when we talk about capacity building. The SCC's definition is the process of building the systems, structures, and skills and investing in the leadership that nonprofits need to succeed. I think every successful for-profit business, and certainly George and I know from our own professional work that sustainability and growth require investing in the people and the infrastructure in the organization. That isn't a given in the nonprofit arena, and most small nonprofits simply don't have the resources to do that unless they're given designated resources. And we chose to commit to 3 consecutive years of funding for capacity building for each organization that we funded. We didn't want it to go on indefinitely because we knew we couldn't reach enough organizations, but 3 years at least gave them long enough to understand how vital that support is. And over 18 years, we funded 51 different nonprofits in the Seattle area.
That's great, because after 3 years, they probably saw the value and were willing to invest in it themselves. They
That
saw
was
the ROI on that. Yeah. So maybe you could talk a little bit more about, because you developed something called the peer exchange meetings. And, how did those contribute to your work, and what was the impact that it had on your giving? Because you started doing that with your grantees, correct?
We did. Very shortly after we made our first series of grants, I went to a meeting at Philanthropy Northwest where someone from the Murdoch Foundation just happened to throw out the comment that our grantees consistently tell us that the most important thing we do for them is provide them opportunities for peer exchange. And that was a new concept to me at the time, but I went home and I said to George, it shouldn't cost any money and it won't take a lot of time. Don't you think this is something we can do? So we started our peer exchange meetings initially every other month, brown bag lunches, always in one of the executive director's offices or place where they do their programs. And they came together to talk about the issues that were challenging them. I facilitated the process by selecting dates, sending out reminders, and finding a host. One of the executive directors we were supporting always was host, and the benefit of doing that was he or she was able to identify at least the first topic of discussion for the group. And because we sat in on those meetings, mostly silently, we had the opportunity to hear them talk about their challenges, their conflicts, the complexity of what they were dealing with, and the isolation they felt. And most of them did not belong to any other peer organization where they had a similar opportunity.
I think that was revelatory for us, because when we started this, we were a little afraid that our grantees wouldn't talk honestly at these peer exchange meetings about their challenges. And what we found out pretty relatively quickly is that as we built trust in these relationships, they were willing to talk about their challenges and what worked and what didn't work. And the amazing thing is, a lot of these people were having the exact same problems, but since they're really kind of in siloed professions and they didn't have peer networks of their own, they really didn't understand that many of these are the same problems that all nonprofit leaders face. And it was a chance for them to vent and create their own network, even though they weren't working in the same fields.
That's great. And I think that's, we've heard of, convenings, but I really like the idea of a peer exchange rather than a convening, because a convening sounds like you're summoning them to you, where a peer meeting is you're inviting peers to discuss among themselves. That's a nice, different words that mean the same thing, but probably have a different connotation to them. So that's a great idea. And we talked about this, wanted to know, at the time you set up the Cedarmere Foundation, um, did you have a sunset date for the foundation? And if you did not have a sunset date, what was sort of your long-term plan upon creation? And then, how did you sort of get to the end without, because we just had the question, did they start off with a sunset? And it's like, I actually don't know the answer to that one, but Kathy gave me the answer, but I think you should share it with everyone because it's an interesting sort of arc and not what I expected.
It is, and it wasn't what we expected initially either. Our concept was that we would exist in perpetuity, but our bylaws didn't necessarily agree with that, because basically we said that George and I would have to leave the board when we turned 80, and I turned 80 a year and a half ago.
You could amend your bylaws,
What?
You could just amend your bylaws, say 90 or 100.
Yeah. And what I didn't know at 62 when we started the foundation, that I was very much aware of as I was approaching 80, was that there was some wisdom in that number. And that obviously it's a lot of work. We had no staff until 2016, and then only part-time staff until we started the sunsetting process. But in any case, in 2019, we were only 5 years away from 2024. So we started talking about it. The board said, you need to talk to your family members and see if someone's willing to take on the volunteer leadership role for Cedarmere when you retire. The answer was no. There wasn't. Our kids were mid-career, mid-child rearing. Some had some significant health challenges, and it simply wasn't feasible for them to do that. We didn't want to see resources in our endowment going to pay full-time executive director after I retired. And so we decided at that point that we would sunset. But I will tell you, a year later, in late 2020, we said, you know what, we probably would have made the decision to sunset now if we hadn't already made it, because we saw such tremendous need among the organizations we were supporting and huge increase in demand for their services that they were unable to meet. So as it turned out, it was a timely decision to make for reasons having nothing to do with us.
And then but your children, grandchildren, some of them were involved as, why don't you explain how they were involved and not as an unpaid executive director, but their involvement in the foundation. And then you also had external nonprofit leaders that joined. So maybe talk
We-
about those two.
We did. We did.
You talk about the kids and I'll talk about the community members.
We tried to, now keep in mind, not all of our grandchildren were even born when we started the foundation, but, and we had created the foundation as a membership organization. So any member of the family age 10 and older was a member. And we tried a variety of different ways to engage the kids in small dollar grants, even actually having them request proposals from 3 organizations at one point. But it didn't really catch on with them. Our granddaughter, who later became a voting member of the board after she graduated from college, loved every minute of it. It's part of her DNA. But the grandsons really had other things that
Oh,
they'd rather be spending.
It's a gender issue, huh?
Well,
Is that the one that went to law school though?
yes.
It is kind of in her DNA.
Yes, it is. It is. So we ended our grandkids or our junior members grant making, but at the same time, we decided to have our annual membership meeting at one of the organizations that we were supporting, and we typically got a tour by the executive director or one of their staff, and the kids and grandkids all got to see those programs in action, and that had a huge impact on them. So I think that was probably the most effective way of involving them, even though it took us a while to get there.
Yeah, as Kathy has said, probably about 2013, we really had a bit of a crisis because several of our children had decided that they really no longer wanted to serve on the board. And we had created a fair amount of bureaucracy with no staff, which meant they had to spend a lot of time doing things with their parents. And they finally decided, some of them, that and we gave them the freedom to do this, though they probably would have taken it had we not given it to them. Anyway, it became very clear that we were going to lose several members of the board. So we had a bit of a crisis, and we began a discussion, because in our bylaws, we'd always allowed for community members, not just family members, but we didn't have any. So we went looking for community members, and it came as no big surprise that we began to look in the nonprofit sector. And what we ended up with was really a cadre of very influential and important board members from the community who were nonprofit leaders. And I would say that's one of the most consequential decisions we ever made, because they brought a level of current expertise and experience and passion that really kind of, I think, rekindled our foundation in many ways.
So a couple questions, because people in the room are philanthropic advisors of multiple stripes, CPAs, attorneys, philanthropic advisors, wealth managers. Of the people that you've worked with over the years, either what type or who specifically, who was most impactful for you? How did they help you through, the starts, the finishes, all the things you've been through with having a foundation?
Are you talking about philanthropic?
They're philanthropic advisors, yes.
Well, I have to say, probably the single person who was most influential was Frank Merrick, the foundation consultant who came up and led our initial board retreat and then helped us restructure the board and refocus. Basically, that shift we made in end of 2013, was from a family focused philanthropy, to a mission-focused philanthropy. Capacity building had always been our means of grant making to support organizations, but the initial focus was more in getting the family involved in something that was bigger than the family. And as our kids wanted to pull away from the foundation, and we needed to bring on other people to serve on the board, not just George and me. And as we saw the impact of capacity building grant making, we decided that going forward, in fact, we even changed our vision statement, that the capacity building would guide our activity and our grant making from that point on.
And you did have I think Amy was one of your board members that you brought on who you.
We have had 5 community board members since 2014. Amy Zimmerman being the longest serving. She served for 10 years until we sunsetted last year. But all of them have led nonprofits before, and 3 of them led nonprofits that we had funded previously. And that's how we got to know them and realize what effective leaders they were and how much they could bring to our discussions and our decision making in terms of future grant making.
And I will save you all the trouble of having to Google Frank. Sadly, Frank passed away, and so he's not able to consult with you, but I do think he has colleagues, but I just wanted to recognize that his contribution and that he's missed.
And of course, I will tell you, there are times when your attorney is incredibly important. I think particularly in the beginning phase of setting up a foundation, certainly in the ending phase, in sunsetting. I was really happy to have BNY Mellon there helping us figure out how to convert our investments into cash. We unfortunately had to start doing it in 2022 and 2023 because we had spent down by the second quarter of 2024. So, our wealth management advisors were very important. And our accountants who keep us honest and get our tax returns.
As opposed to your attorneys, they don't keep you honest. Just kidding. And then what trade I use trade association loosely, but affiliation groups did you join or you have been? I mean, I know Washington Women's Foundation was hugely important to you, but are there others that you would call out that in the Pacific Northwest that you were a member of that you think were really helpful to you?
We joined Philanthropy Northwest right away. And I will say, I think it's very helpful to belong to a local or regional philanthropic association because you meet people in your own community who are doing the same kind of work you're doing. Of the national organizations that we belonged, GO, Grantmakers for Effective Organizations, was probably the most helpful. But I always felt when I went to a GO conference that everyone was preaching to the choir because I think every member of GO believes in capacity building and is doing it effectively. And we also learned a lot from and made a presentation about our sunsetting process last fall, Exponent Philanthropy, which used to be the Association of Small Foundations. I think those were all valuable, and that was about all I could deal with.
Yeah, that's a lot. So of all the things, and think about the grants that you've made over the years, what's your favorite, what are you most proud of your accomplishments during the time you had that foundation? What is a highlight for you?
I've been doing a lot of talking. How about you jump in?
Oh, okay.
Okay, you guys had these questions in advance. You should be prepared.
Yes, I've basically traveled in the sidecar here, and that's been a great position for me. I would claim that one of the most, and I've lived a rich and bountiful life, but this has been some of the most inspiring work that I've ever done in my lengthy life. Because what you get to do is you get to meet small groups of people who've decided, sitting around a kitchen table often, that they want to change the world. And they exist in this community. And it was just so inspirational to listen to these people and to listen to their plans and then how they execute those plans. So I would say the thing I'm most thankful and proud of is our ability to support these incredible leaders who work kind of day in and day out in this community to make this place a better place to live. And so we had some early support for some incredible organizations like Mary's Place. And, we go way, way back with them. And the work they've done is extraordinary. And Hamlin Robinson School that serves a specific area of need in this community. And I won't go through all 50 plus community partners, but that's what both inspires me and what I'm proudest of is the incredible leadership that we got to witness and support.
You will find a few profiles of some of the amazing organizations and the transformations they went through in our legacy document. And we didn't bring enough for everybody here, but if you don't walk out of the door with a copy, do go to our website and you can read a flip book on the website or you can download the PDF and learn more about it.
If you don't think that's one of the things you're most proud of, I'm going to add it to your list. You should be really proud of that document. It's really good. I don't know if
Thank
you wrote
you.
it or if you ghostwrote it, or I think Kathy probably wrote it with
It
the
took a
sidebar.
year
but-
to get it to the form that it's. I felt like many years, but anyway, I think another thing we're most proud of and was a specific goal of our sunsetting process was to share what we learned about the power of capacity building grant making with the rest of the philanthropic community. That is why we wrote the legacy document. That's why we put together a presentation for association conferences, et cetera. That's why we're here today.
Yes.
That's why we were happy to have the opportunity to come here and talk to you.
So let's go to my last question, and then we'll let you all ask questions. And hopefully we are leaving enough room for audience questions. But and I know that you have lessons learned in your document. But if you had to call out one lesson that you personally learned through all of this, what would it be? I'm going to let George go first.
Oh, thank you. So here's an expression that hit me at exactly the right moment. Within the first couple of years of our experience with grant making for small organizations, small nonprofits, we found that there's a merry-go-round, and leaders don't stay often because they get burnt out and they don't have resources. And we were kind of knocking our heads against the wall because we would support an organization, support their leader, and they'd quit. And so someone gave me this piece of advice, which I hope will live forever in my mind, is that in this field, you bet on the jockey, not the horse. And that was very true about what I learned, because what happens is you support these leaders in these small, struggling nonprofits, and finally they decide to move on. And most of them don't go into the for-profit world; they stay in the nonprofit world. So when you invest in these leaders, particularly when they're leading their first organizations, you're really investing in the nonprofit sector as it continues to grow and expand. And we hope with ever increasing levels of expertise in their leaders.
That's good advice, because you're not wrong. People don't tend to I'm tired of the nonprofit sector. I'm going to go over to that for-profit. They do tend to stay. They might switch horses, but the jockeys they stay in the sector because it's part of their world. So that's great advice. I appreciate it. Kathy, what about you?
I think finding ways that are mutually beneficial to build trust with the organizations that donors and philanthropists support is really important. For us, by far the most effective way was through the peer exchange, because and we expected it to be beneficial to the executive directors who were meeting and learning from each other and creating a supportive network. I didn't have any idea ahead of time how important it would be for us in getting to know those executive directors and understanding what they were dealing with, as well as building trust, building two-way trust that was beneficial to both of us. And I think learning, realizing that and understanding that if you can change your relationship from a transactional relationship to a partnership where the grant recipients understand that you want them to succeed as much as they want to succeed in whatever their mission is, and that you're there to support them in that effort, rather than being judgmental, and that you recognize that they are the experts in the work that they're doing. They know the communities they're serving. They know the staff and the resources they have to work with. As donors, we're not the experts. And I think there is a tendency for a lot of donors to think they know how their grantees ought to be doing it. And I think we learned very conclusively that that just isn't the case. They know a lot more than we think they know. We had an opportunity to learn some of that through our peer exchange, et cetera, directly from them, listening to them talk about it. But I think trusting in them to know how to use those funds, and then getting rid of all the other stuff that gets in the way, including asking them for a great deal of information that we may or may not really need. In the long run, we ended up simply having annual face-to-face meetings with them to hear how they had used our previous grant and what kind of capacity building needs they thought they would have in the coming year for a future grant. We did away with proposals, we did away with written reports, and we had a much better, much more informative relationship with them by doing so.
George, you look like you wanted to say something.
Well, you can imagine how much time we spent in the early days going in minute detail over budgets of these nonprofits. And amazingly enough, they weren't really financially viable. Surprise. There was a whole learning experience there about building that trust. And building that trust was a slow but steady process. But I will certainly agree with what Kathy said. That was one of our most important learning experiences, that we really weren't the experts. And as much as we thought that accountability was important, and it was perhaps, but the most important form of accountability we had was knowing these leaders and knowing what their mission was and how they were inspired by it and the sacrifices they were willing to make to support their organizations.
That's a great answer. So thank you. I've talked to other philanthropists that do that too. They just got rid of the reports and had face-to-face meetings because they could absorb it and process it at the time and not have somebody, have to produce some report that's customized just to them. So what's that called? Trust-based philanthropy? It's a concept now.
It is.
All right. I do have other questions, but I want to give you all a chance to ask questions. And Sarah has a microphone. So if you could raise your hand, Sarah will come to you and then it will be on the recording. So thank you for raising your hand.
Hi, I'm Bree. Thank you guys so much. My question is around the same topic of having the leadership in nonprofits and how vital that is for the success. As we kind of see the generation shifting and people at a younger age wanting to have these type of leadership roles in the nonprofit world, like myself, this was an experience I personally went through, looking to potentially be a COO of a nonprofit, but still raising a family and not at the stage in my life that I can take a salary that is not, reasonable. Do you see any way to kind of address this issue so that some of these younger generations, we can start to take advantage of those who want to get into it a little sooner?
Good question. Never an easy one. And I do know some nonprofits who have said, regardless of how the rest of the organization is impacted, we are going to pay a living wage because we owe that to the people doing this work. The Washington Women's Foundation did that about 10 years ago. And it required making changes and shifts in other areas of operation. I think the tension is always that regardless of an organization's mission, the demand for services is usually bigger, sometimes exponentially bigger than they can meet. And obviously, you can't be all things to all people, but if a nonprofit doesn't take care of the people doing the work, their staff, then nothing else much matters, and ultimately they won't succeed. I'm not sure I've really answered your question. It's a tough one.
It is a tough one. I just quickly, this was an alarming development to me, but nonprofits have decided to try something called cooperative leadership, where they'll have like 2 or 3 executive directors, and the old top-down guy here is going, "What?" But it does seem to reduce some of the stress and strain, and some of the organizations that I have seen go to this multi-dimensional what? Shared leadership. Yeah, yeah, it seems to be working well, much to my slight amazement. So I do understand that the nonprofit sector is doing those types of things that I specifically designed to reduce the stress on leadership.
Obviously, there's a cost involved if you're paying 2 or 3 EDs instead of one. On the other hand, if the staff is able to function more effectively and get the work done, hopefully philanthropies will understand the benefits of doing that and be willing to support it. Okay.
Thank you both. Janelle Turner, philanthropic advisor. Oops. I just really appreciate your reflections on how personally just rewarding this work has been for you both. And obviously you've made a very intentional choice to focus on supporting BIPOC-led and serving organizations. There are numerous studies highlighting the disparities in funding to those organizations. And I would just love to hear you reflect on your personal journey that led you to make that decision about funding those organizations in particular.
Sure.
We had a very specific and memorable board meeting not long after we had acquired 2 community board members, both of whom were nonprofit executive directors, one of whom was working for the city at the time. And she had one of her colleagues at the city share a PowerPoint presentation with us showing the disparity of resources by neighborhood within the city, and all of the challenges that were cropping up in certain neighborhoods because they lack the resources to address, basic problems. And after watching that, we said to ourselves, why wouldn't we, if we care about getting the biggest impact for our small dollar grants, why wouldn't we fund the neighborhoods, the programs that are most under-resourced in our community? And that really shifted our focus very specifically to funding those BIPOC neighborhoods and organizations serving those communities.
And to me, we made one final grant to the BIPOC Leadership Coalition to fund sabbaticals, and that came out of some personal experiences I had. I had run a very struggling independent school that was very struggling, and they gave me a sabbatical. So they couldn't pay me; they gave me a sabbatical, and I was also in the Air National Guard. And right as I got the sabbatical, there was a war that broke out. So scratch that sabbatical. But I began to understand how important it was for leaders, be they BIPOC or just executive directors of nonprofits, that they had some time to refresh and reflect. And that sabbatical is an incredibly important part of that. So I'm very proud of that last grant we made.
That is great. And if people don't know what sabbaticals are, that is becoming a movement both in the for-profit and the nonprofit world. I had the benefit of going on a sabbatical one time. I'm sorry that yours was at war. That is unfortunate, George. I can say you don't have to call that your sabbatical. But having sabbaticals, no matter where you are in the world, it is refreshing and gets you to be able to stay in your seat. It's like going out of maternity leave, but coming back without a baby. I mean, it really is. So when you come back, you can be at full steam. Because I'm pleased to hear that your final impactful grant was to support sabbaticals. Because even if you can't afford to pay people more, paying them or allowing them to be refresh, it's valuable.
And burnout is an extreme problem in the nonprofit sector, particularly for top leadership, because the job always demands more than you have to give. And at some point, you just wear out, and sabbaticals can make a huge difference. Instead of having people leave the sector, they can refresh, reflect, and they almost always come back with different ideas about how to do their job, how to lead their people, because they've had that distance. And often they're not more than 3 months. I mean, you're not taking a year off.
Yeah, it's not like Europe.
No,
Yeah.
but they can make a big difference. And the BIPOC ED Coalition is specifically focused on both shared leadership and providing sabbaticals for EDs who desperately need it.
I think we had a question here and a question over here. Do you still have your question? Okay, yes, okay, right, Sarah, thank you.
Actually, George anticipated my question about the sabbaticals. So when I read, this is an amazing document. The legacy document it's truly amazing. So thank you for that, and congratulations for your good work. My comment now about the sabbaticals is when I read about that in your legacy document, it reminded me of the MacArthur Foundation Genius Grants that you let people, you allow people to do what they love doing and give them the freedom to do that. So I'll ask another question, and that is, you mentioned that in your bylaws, you had the provision that when both of you, each of you reached 80, you would no longer.
Actually, it's just one of us, I think.
Oh,
It was only Kathy they really wanted to get rid of.
It was both of us.
He's not there yet.
Thank goodness.
Married a younger man.
Lucky Kathy.
But
This is being recorded. Your children are going to be just like.
I'm glad I brought that up. No, but what was the genesis of that? Where did that, is that typical in family foundations?
I don't know that it's typical, but 80 seemed really old to me when I was 62. And I thought, you know what? I probably shouldn't be doing this after I'm 80. And you know what? I was tired when I got to 80. It's a lot of work. It was wonderful work and inspiring work, but it's a lot of work. And we just sort of arbitrarily picked 80, but by the time I got close to it, I thought, there was some wisdom in that.
Yeah, we didn't want Jake Tapper to write a book, so.
Okay. Okay, there's a question right over here. Yes. Your kids are really going to enjoy that part of the program.
Hi, Mr. Edwards. I have to call you that because you were the head of school for my son at Epiphany, and by far our favorite head of school during their journey through the school system. Anyway, I just had a question about, is there anything in hindsight, looking back on the 18 years of your foundation, that you might have done differently?
She stole my question. It was a good question.
I think I probably would have chosen to invite community members to serve on the board earlier. We did from the very beginning, perhaps on Frank's advice, make a provision in the bylaws to have non-family members serve on the board, but we didn't actualize that until 2014. So 8 years later, they added so much that why wouldn't we have wanted them earlier if we had known that? Actually, the real inspiration for me was in watching a webinar that Exponent Philanthropy does on a somewhat regular basis, talking about, and it had 3 foundation representatives on the program talking about the benefits of having community members on a family foundation board. And all of them were unequivocally enthusiastic about it. So that really pushed us in that direction as well.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think the moment that I was having doubts about what we were doing was when, basically our kids began to desert us and say they had more important things to do than the Cedarmere Foundation, which was slightly upsetting. But fortunately, I'm married to a woman with great insight, common sense, and compassion. So she talked me down off that ledge, and as our children departed, we found these community members, and it really did change the focus of the foundation. So I think the most important thing I took away from that was the importance of adaptive leadership, seeing these challenges and moving through them. And that's not only true of the foundation, but also the nonprofits that we supported. Those that could adapt to changing situations were almost universally the most successful.
And one of the most gratifying things for us was to have two grandchildren decide that they wanted to serve on the board when they were old enough to do that. So, you know, it goes
Their names were in pencils in the will. So can we put,
Well, you know that grandchildren is God's gifts to people who have children.
That's right. Absolutely.
But yeah, that was one of my final questions. At this point, I want you to all thank George and Kathy. This was amazing.
thank you for having us. It was delightful.
And if you've not already dug into your desserts, you can now. And those of you that are the table captains, if you can please have everybody introduce themselves and then have the conversation, and then we will convene one more time before we let you all go today. But thank you. And thank you again, George and Kathy. Now you can eat. Thank you. Our next conversation is going to be on August 12th. I know it's in the middle of summer, but I think you'll want to come. It is Doug Baldwin. And it's that Doug Baldwin. Yes. He's a philanthropist, he's an entrepreneur, and he's a former Seahawk player. And so you guys think, if you are a member of SPAN, you will get to sign up before people that are not members of SPAN. So put it on your calendar when you get that email. Don't ignore it, because after the members have a few days to sign up before non-members. So just be aware of that. And you'll get a follow-up survey again. Thank you for being here, and pardon me? Oh, she's not talking to me. Okay. You'll get a follow-up survey email, so please respond to that if you want to have input. We appreciate that at all times, because we actually listen to you. And if you have anybody that are like George and Kathy, that you would like them to share their wisdom for a conversation, please let us know that, because we are always looking for new additional people to have conversations with. So those are my final comments. Enjoy your summer till August 12th, when we hope we see all of you. And thank you again to George and Kathy.